Ports are the lifelines of our economies, moving 80% of global trade. But they are also hotspots for emissions, wastes, and habitat destruction, while facing climate risks and other threats. The challenge is urgent, but it's also an opportunity to transform ports into hubs of innovation, efficiency, and resilience. Today, we're joined by experts who will inspire us with practical strategies and success stories on shaping green and resilient ports that cut emissions, improve air quality, and drive sustainable, future-ready growth across Southeast Asia. The webinar begins shortly. Please stay tuned.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is organised by the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, which is an initiative of the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund. This session marks the third instalment in a series designed to spotlight global innovations and spark peer learning among policymakers, port authorities, and industry leaders across the region. Our format today will be a brief introduction to materiality from myself, followed by 3 focused presentations, and then we will round out the session with some moderated discussion and audience Q&A. So please make sure that you're thinking of your questions, and please feel free to pop them into the Q&A chat box as we go through. Before we do jump into presentations, I'm really pleased to introduce our speakers today. So kicking off with Adrian Salmons. Adrian is an international transport specialist with more than 20 years experience in maritime ports and logistics, and he's currently serving as a senior transport specialist within the ASEAN Development Bank, based in ADB headquarters in Manila, where Adrian leads work on sustainable port and maritime development across the Asia-Pacific region. Secondly, we have Sarah Barron. Sarah is the Environment Manager for Midwest Ports Authority. Sarah is an experienced environment and sustainability professional with more than 20 years experience across ports, resources, and government. She is currently the Environment Manager for Midwest Ports Authority, where she leads environmental management, sustainability strategy, and regulatory compliance. Geraldton Port is located in Western Australia, and today Sarah will share her experiences with us in undertaking materiality assessments. And last but not least, we also have Mr. Patra Pisayasawat, who is the Technical Environment Officer within the Corporate Strategic Department of the Port Authority of Thailand, who will take us through green port initiatives that the Port of Thailand has in place. So please feel free to submit your questions today at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll bring them into the discussion towards the end. Without further ado, we will get on with the first presentation, which, as I mentioned, was just a brief introduction to materiality and what this means for ports. So just bear with me while I share my screen, and I'll take you through that before we dive into our broader presentations. Okay, so materiality, we're thinking about this as a practical approach for prioritizing sustainability initiatives within our ports. And just go to our next slide. So why should we do a materiality assessment? So it's not really just a reporting exercise, it's really a practical planning tool that can help us move forward from broad sustainability ambition to kind of focus in on focused, defensible and actionable priorities. So it really helps us determine what actually matters, what matters to our local environment, our key stakeholders, and what environmental, social and governance issues are the most significant and most important for our specific operation. It also helps us manage risk by linking sustainability issues into business risk. It enables us to think about who our stakeholders are and respond to their expectations. With all of the information that you get from a materiality assessment, it really helps inform strategy, investment prioritization, performance measurement, and the use of what can sometimes be limited resources, so really guiding those better decisions. And at the end of the day, it also helps us meet market and disclosure expectations, providing a defensible basis for why we've selected the particular sustainability focus areas for our organisation. So what does materiality even mean? Well, the definition within the dictionary is a measure of how important a given piece of information is when making a decision. When we think about materiality through a sustainability lens, we can have a material sustainability opportunity. So this can be something that really positively impacts an organization's business model, revenue, or profits. And on the flip side, we can have what is called a material risk. And this is one that could negatively impact our organization's operating or financial performance. In the world of sustainability, we can think about materiality through a couple of different lenses. We can think about impact materiality, and this is really around the impacts that our operations have on the local environment, our stakeholders. And then we can think about the financial materiality. And so this is really about what are those impacts that have an impact on the business and the financial outcomes of that business. And combined, these are kind of described as double materiality. So these are just some terms to familiarize yourself with when we're talking about materiality and what that means in the sustainability sense. So when we do a materiality assessment, we recognize that every organization, be it a port or otherwise, is unique in its size, its shape, its location. And what is really important is that we need to focus on what is most material to that particular operation. And so through a process, we can actually start to whittle down a list of what is relevant to what is material. And so we undertake 4 kind of key steps when we do this. We think about the organizational context. And so that's really thinking about our value chain, which I'll dive into in a moment. And then we think about what the actual and potential impacts are. So this is really thinking about, okay, well, how does that interact with various aspects, and how do we look at the risks associated with those? And then we want to assess the significance of that. And so what really matters to our stakeholders, what matters to the business, and what can we actually control and influence? And this all leads us to being able to prioritize those key material focus areas that we'll be using for our sustainability strategy going forward. So I mentioned value chain, and so value chain originated from a chap called Michael Porter from Harvard University, and he was really focused on, how do businesses make a profit? And so in the sustainability world, we're looking at that value chain, but we're looking about how our value chain interacts with society, with the natural environment, with the economy, and with our key stakeholders. And that starts to help us define a list of what are those potential interactions and what are the potential sustainability topics that are relevant to those interactions. Now, that might give us quite a long list. So we need to kind of come up with a process for kind of whittling that list down into a manageable list, because resources within organizations are generally quite finite. So a way of doing that is to look at the risks associated with those interactions. And so a risk is defined as the possibility that something bad or dangerous will happen. So on this slide, I've just come up with 3 very high level potential risks for a port organization. And we'll go through a bit of a process about how we can consider materiality and these risks. And so the first one that I've identified is those Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions. And so these are the emissions from combustion of fuel from assets owned by the port. And the risk really is around mandated targets and disclosure requirements for operational emissions are increasing at both national and international levels, which is driving, obviously, the need for action. And so this can result in significant capex costs to decarbonize our fleets, and it can also expose us to carbon pricing mechanisms and regulatory penalties. And so therefore, in this example, we've identified this as being a potentially high risk for the organization. Remember, this is just a mock organization. Then we look at Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, and here we're seeing growing voluntary and emerging mandatory expectations to measure and disclose on Scope 3 emissions. So not yet mandated, but definitely an emerging space. And here we might see increasing stakeholder pressure for transparency. So we're not necessarily going to be getting any sort of regulatory penalties, but our stakeholders are starting to talk about it. And therefore, we've identified this particular risk as being a medium risk. And then thirdly, we've got biodiversity. And so here we're thinking, in this example, of a maintenance dredging activity occurring adjacent to a protected Ramsar wetland site and sensitive marine habitats. Now, with this, there's the potential for direct impacts on protected habitats, migratory species, and impact in ecosystem function, which then would lead to the risk of legal penalties, project delays, and community opposition. And so this one's quite significant for us because we need to undertake our maintenance dredging in order to continue bringing our vessels in and out safely, but we also need to manage that within the regulatory framework that we've got in front of us. And so this particular risk in this example has been identified as being quite high, or very high, in fact. So now we understand our risks. We've done our risk assessment on those relevant topics. Now we need to think about, okay, well, what do our stakeholders care about? What matters to them? And so stakeholder engagement is identified as an ongoing process of interaction and dialogue between the undertaking, so the port, and its stakeholders. And this enables the port to hear, understand, and respond to those interests and concerns. So when we want to talk to our stakeholders, the initial part of the process is to really identify who they are. And so obviously, people within the organization, our employees are a key stakeholder group, but it might also be that our customers are a key stakeholder group, or the communities in which we operate are key stakeholder groups, our financiers, our insurance, local government, etc. And so it's really important to kind of identify who those stakeholders are and then start to glean valuable insights from them. This process also really helps build trust, and by having that kind of transparent conversation gives you some really good insights into what your key stakeholders are thinking. So when we start talking to our stakeholders, we'll give them those three examples, and we'll ask them how important those three examples are and how much it matters that the port addresses them. And so we start off by wondering what level of importance are those topics to our key stakeholders. And so it might be that Scope 1 and Scope 3 emissions are incredibly important to our stakeholders. However, biodiversity was less important, maybe because they weren't familiar with the Ramsar wetlands, or there was another reason for that one to be low. Remember, this is just an example. So we've asked our stakeholders how important things are. And now, as a business, we really need to understand how much control and influence do we have over these, because it's all well and good that they're important to our stakeholders, but really, how can we affect change with these? And so then we ask ourselves, what is our ability to control and influence those three topics? And you start to see the spread change. So it might be that, we're responsible for our vessel fleet, therefore we have, a strong degree of control over our Scope 1 emissions, and we can manage a vessel fleet transition. However, Scope 3 emissions are further down the value chain, and therefore our ability to control and influence those are quite challenging. And so whilst they remain important to our stakeholders, they kind of fall into this kind of bottom right-hand quadrant. And then we have biodiversity, where we have limited ability to control and influence, and it's a low importance to our stakeholders. And so you can see here that we can start to kind of prioritize those emissions based on the level of importance to stakeholders and our ability to control and influence them. So in this scenario here, you can see that you would focus your efforts and prioritize Scope 1 emissions. But if we go back to that conversation we were having earlier about risk, we also need to make sure that we're capturing those specific areas where they have a high risk for the business. So we might have decided initially that we just want to do Scope 1 emissions, but because biodiversity presents a high risk, it might be that we want to kind of fold that into our sustainability focus areas as well. So this process really goes through understanding what's important to the organisation and our ability to control and influence it, understanding what's important to our stakeholders, but also determining what level of risk is associated with each of those sustainability related topics. And so this enables us to go from a really long list to a much shorter and much more focused list, and really helps us to kind of justify why we've decided that we're going to focus on a particular set of sustainability topics. And so to close, and this really is the same as the first slide, materiality helps us to prioritize what matters. It helps us to manage risk by linking sustainability issues to business risk. It helps us respond to stakeholder expectations, guide better decisions, and also meet those market disclosure expectations. And so that was just a little bit of a brief introduction into materiality, which hopefully will set the scene for the next few presentations that we have. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Adrian Salmons, up to the platform to share his insights on some regional surveys that were completed to understand the priorities for ports in Southeast Asia. So Adrian, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to yourself.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks for the introduction. Similarly, I will share my screen now. As Jackie introduced, this part of the webinar series covers a social license to operate and the materiality, which is becoming more of an impact assessment for port operations and the responsible governance of ports, as the users take more of an active role in promoting within their own corporate responsibility and shareholder requirements to ensure that the service industries that they interact with are likewise involved in the responsible actor within the transport realm, and in this case, ports and shipping. Second slide that I have on the screen is focused on the fact that ports are evolving from being purely logistics assets to social and environmental and governance actors. Focusing across the ASEAN ports, that they're facing rising expectations, not just from the legislative angle and the regulators, but from communities, financiers, cargo owners, and global shipping lines. So in other words, the users of facilities and also those providing finance that have expectations and often firm requirements in their fiscal arrangements and lending platforms that the loan is not just serviceable, but it is also arranged in accordance with responsible environmental and social actions. So the concept of a green port has expanded into something broader. So the social license to operate and the material ESG performance and platforms are now seen as competitive assets. So comparing one port to another, the users of the ports and and those providing support services and financial support are also looking at the differentiation of their material ESG actions and responsible performance. Slide 3, the maritime transport contributes a figure of about 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So without action, that share could rise significantly. As global trade increases, the more number of ships are being built and in operation. But emissions are only part of the story. So communities around ports experience air pollution, water contamination, noise, traffic congestion, light spill, hard waste and liquid waste and runoff. And these impacts shape the public perception, regulatory pressure, and ultimately a port's social license to operate. Environmental performance can be considered no longer a technical issue; it's a social and political one. This slide demonstrates the pressures being placed upon the port as a focus node for marine, terminal, and interactivity within the hinterland. So it's important to consider that ports do not control all the actors that interface with these operational and transport actions, but often they're held accountable because they're the primary node, which is attracting and directly and indirectly the freight movements, both landside and from the marine side. So port authorities are often told you don't control the truck, ships, or tenants, yet communities, regulators, and the media see the port as the permanent and visible actor responsible. So because ports own the land, manage access, provide leases for operators on that land, and provide the operating framework, they are expected to lead, even without full control, the responsible component of providing the safeguards and coverage. So this is fundamentally a governance challenge, not just an environmental one. So green initiatives related to ports often focus narrowly on the environmental performance, yet sustainability, now grouped together as a ESG component, requires ports to balance their commercial, viability, environmental protection, social outcomes. So this matters because lenders, investors, and those in the supply chain and the users of the facility and the indirect recipients of the supply chain no longer look at isolated projects. They look at the system in entirety and the governance and the long-term risk associated with that interaction of the port as a node. This is where materiality becomes critical, identifying what truly matters to the stakeholders involved in the port supply chain, not just what's easy to measure. Around the world, port authorities are aligning through organisations such as listed here, which is just a small sample. So International Association of Ports and Harbours, European Seaport Association, American Association of Ports Authorities, and others align the port sustainability program, and there's many different variations on the same theme, but all focusing on the same outcome. So this isn't about branding, it's about credibility, comparability, and investor confidence. So for ASEAN ports, this signals a clear direction and global expectations which are converging. Even if the regulations differ slightly from location, the focus mandate is the same. This slide represents the measurement in accordance with European ESPO eco ports, and what they measure is the criticality or the top priority measured through European seaports that are members of this association as to what is critical to them, what is the top-down priority. So there's been well documented updates on this analysis and these ranked criterias. And the changes and the material changes in this, especially for how ports frame their social license to operate, investment readiness and resilience. So you can see that the top 10 priorities have been updated annually, and it provides an interesting alignment that climate change, which was absent in the top 10 criteria in 2018, and prior to that, is now the number one in 2024. So you can draw on this, that the responsibility and the change in regulations and the focus from users and service providers and financiers has created that change in the prioritization, and these transfer into regulatory actions, and as well as operational actions. So to conclude, social license to operate, it's no longer informal or optional. It's shaped by measurable ESG performance. Materiality allows ports to focus on what truly matters, building trust with their operational base, concessionaires, leaseholders, importers, exporters, shipping lines, and all the users that concentrate on using the ports as a supply chain node. Ports to remain competitive in the challenging global system need to consider this and need to consider the changes and the focus that's upon them. So for ASEAN ports, the opportunity is clear: act early, act credibly, and collectively. Yeah. So thank you very much, and back to Jackie.
Adrian, thank you for that great presentation, and I'm looking forward to sitting down with you in the Q&A session to get through some questions. I have a couple of my own that I've popped down, but I will ask the audience if they have any, please also to use the Q&A chat there to be able to bring those questions through. So thanks very much, Adrian. So continuing on with today's panelists, I'd next like to introduce Sarah Barron from Midwest Port Authority in WA, so Geraldton, Western Australia. Sarah, if you'd like to join us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me today. As Jackie's already introduced me, I'm the Environment Manager working for the Midwest Ports Authority, based in the city of Geraldton, which is on the West Australian coast. Midwest Ports Authority manages the Geraldton Port, and that's located approximately 400 kilometres north of Perth, which is Western Australia's capital city. So yeah, I've just got an aerial image here of the Geraldton Port. We're a government trading enterprise, so owned by the state government of Western Australia. We're a multi-commodity, multi-user port, and we have 7 operating berths. Key products that we handle in Geraldton are bulk materials, including iron ore, grain, and mineral sands. We also receive imports of fuel, fertiliser, and break bulk cargo, increasingly more wind turbines, as shown in the bottom of the screen. We're also responsible for a commercial fishing boat harbour that's shown up there in the right of the screen. That's really critical for our region in supporting the commercial crayfishing industry. As you can also see here, we do have residential development extremely close to our port. We have very limited land buffer around our port. So yeah, significant interaction there with the community, and the port does play an integral part of the Geraldton community and how it operates. So stakeholder expectations are considered extremely critical for us in maintaining a social licence to operate at the Geraldton port. Just wanted to show our sustainability framework for Midwest Ports Authority. It is based on 3 pillars for people, planet, and prosperity. This framework was developed with view to those 3 pillars operating in balance with each other to achieve sustainability and underpin basically our strategy and the way we look at sustainability. So wanted to take you through our materiality assessment that Midwest Ports Authority completed a couple of years ago. So we did complete the materiality assessment in 2 stages. That was important for us to ensure that our sustainability strategy was informed by stakeholder views. But we did start stage 1 just by seeking engagement with our own internal staff. We commenced that with a desktop value chain analysis. Similar to how Jackie explained earlier, we came up with a long list of ESG topics. There were 82 topics altogether to start with based on our value chain. And from there, we conducted a number of internal staff engagement workshops using Mentimeter to assess the importance of each topic to our employees and the organisation's ability to control and influence. And what we found was those workshops were really fun and engaging. They served to increase awareness and education of our staff on sustainability and the various sustainability topics, as well as obviously being able to obtain really important data. So from those workshops, we shortlisted down to 35 ESG topics that were considered important. And then we took our materiality assessment into a second stage, which was important to be able to seek input on what was important from our external stakeholders. So we firstly looked at those 35 topics through a risk lens. We did I guess not progress some of the low risk items that we felt were not required, and then rolled up some other risks into an overarching topics. And then we used basically the same method as we did with our internal staff in running the workshop style using Mentimeter. But we used our Midwest Ports Authority's existing community consultation forum, which we have already established, and that has a great cross-section of community representatives, including industry, local government, community, environmental groups. So we used that forum in which to just to seek that external engagement on what was considered material. And then we aggregated the results from our internal and external engagement surveys to produce a materiality matrix as shown here on the screen. So I guess what we found here, that a lot of the material topics, most things were considered important to our stakeholders. It was the ability to control and influence that was more the differentiating point here. And the items in the top right quadrant were obviously ranked as most important from the results of the survey. So from there, we have been able to extract what we consider our top 10 topics from that materiality assessment. The list is based on fraud, bribery and corruption. Disclosure and transparency of ESG performance was seen as very important. Management of hazardous substances, I think that reflects the proximity of our community to our port operation. Cybersecurity, labour standards and working conditions, employee engagement, data protection and privacy, air quality, seen as very important, health, safety and well-being, and also energy usage. So I guess the final step in our materiality assessment from there was to look at the residual risk. And this was really to ensure that our sustainability strategy was also focusing on the areas that were high risk to the business. So following a risk assessment, we did a comparison then against what was considered high and low risk against the topics that were considered important to our stakeholders. And you can see from our high risk topics here, there's a number of topics here that are considered high that didn't actually rank in our top 10 for our materiality assessment. So issues such as climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity, contamination were seen as high risk topics for Mid West Ports Authority to manage, weren't considered particularly important by our stakeholders. Similarly, some low risk topics were considered in our top 10, including labour standards and working conditions, fraud, bribery, corruption, and employee engagement. And I think that reflects that those low risk topics for Mid West Port Authority are largely seen as business as usual. We have established processes for those things. Therefore, we see them as low risk, but they are still important for our stakeholders that we manage those aspects well. So I guess in summary, our sustainability strategy remains evolving. We expect that we will be looking to redo our materiality assessment again in the future to ensure that it remains current and relevant. It is based on both strategic and foundational ESG topics. It's been really important for us in mapping our focus areas that we consider both stakeholder expectations and risk to make sure that you're covering all important aspects. And transparency in reporting is considered vital. So we do include a lot of detail on our sustainability focus areas, metrics and performance in our annual report, and we'll continue to do so. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions via the Q&A. Back to you. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Sarah, for that excellent presentation. And it was really great to get some insights into how materiality has been put into practice at a port and how those focus areas have been defined, and quite the process to get to the list. But no, that was fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Sarah, and really appreciate that. And yes, if there are any questions, please do pop those into the Q&A box, and we will come back to those towards the end of our session today. But next up, we have Supatra. So Supatra's from the Port Authority of Thailand. Supatra's going to do a brief introduction and then share a video. So I'll pass over to Supatra to take the reins. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie. Before I start my presentation, I would like to thank ACGF and ADB for organizing this webinar and giving me the opportunity to share my experience. I have been working in Port Authority of Thailand more than 10 years, and I was working in the environmental field from the start. Before I start my presentation, I will show you a short video about our port, green port action. And after that, I will share with you some slides regarding my environmental management at PAT. May I ask Gian to just help me with the video?
The Environmental Management Plan was divided into 5 important parts as follows. Sustainable development. At the same time, an Environmental Information System Plan will be initiated by utilizing information technology and continually developing an internal environmental research knowledge base. In addition, PAT is strictly governed by the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, 1973, and the Protocol of 1978, MARPOL 7378. Vessels mooring in the port area are to abide by the regulations cooperation with various organizations. PAT has established a framework of cooperation and support in environmental management with various local and international organizations. PAT's accomplishments in environmental management have been recognized in various meetings and forums, both nationwide and worldwide. Reducing consumption of resources. PAT has focused on energy utilization management by replacing the diesel-powered systems with electric motorized systems, using technology to save energy as well as reduce air pollution. It has also promoted the use of renewable energy in the port area at Lam Chabang Port. A solar cell system has been installed on port buoys to power lanterns and also at the stations where water levels are digitally recorded. Continuing with the energy conservation theme, PAT has also prepared an improvement plan to convert its office buildings into green buildings. Energy-saving LED lights have been installed in the buildings and port areas as part of the energy-saving measures. Environmental conservation. PAT has the intention of conserving the environment and minimizing the environmental impact from its operations. Environmental quality measurements are conducted regularly at Bangkok Port, Lam Chabang Port, and the regional ports by monitoring the quality of the water, air, and noise to meet local environmental standards. Furthermore, various air pollution reduction measures have been implemented. These measures include air pollution reduction from moored vessels by using the port's electricity instead of running vessels' engines. Water pollution caused by port operations is managed by establishing oil traps at equipment repair areas. A wastewater treatment system has been established to ensure the quality of wastewater from office buildings is of an acceptable standard. There is also an emergency management plan in case of environmental degradation, such as oil or chemical spills, to ensure readiness and the ability to solve problems promptly with no effect on the community. Meanwhile, emergency response drills will be held on a regular basis. Waste and refuse from vessels and wharf activities, as well as floating waste near the wharf and surrounding communities, are collected and sorted before disposal in compliance with the correct procedures. Social consciousness. To create awareness among the employees and the community about environmental conservation, PAT has organized training and educational activities on environmental issues. Moreover, corporate social responsibility (CSR) activities have been conducted to give back to society and establish good relations with port staff, surrounding communities, and remote societies.
Thank you. Port Authority of Thailand is state-owned enterprise. The Bangkok Port, Lam Chabang Port, and 3 regional ports. There are different area location of port. So different location is mean that different need, different requirement, and also different expectation from the stakeholder. We develop the environmental master plan to guide our green port implementation. We also conduct the materiality assessment in our master plan and also internal workshop for developing action plan, and also we do the public hearing to listen to our stakeholder requirement, need, and also we improve from their voice. The outcome from our master plan, we divide into 3 main areas. The first area we focus on the decarbonization our operation, which is we would like to reduce our scope 1 and scope 2 emission. We try to reduce fuels consumption and as well as electricity consumption. We opt for the alternative fuels and also energy efficiency equipment. We try to introduce new technology like IoT and AI to improve our implementation in the operation area. The second main strategy is the human resource development. We believe that people are a key factor to drive long-term environmental improvement. We train our personnel, we update them with the new technologies, and also update them with the regulatory frameworks that we need to listen to our stakeholder and the regulatory reform. The third strategy that we are focused on is the cooperation with the supply chain. We cannot just reduce our emission alone. We have to work with our stakeholder to reduce our scope 3 emission. The result from our next slide, please. The master plans used as a guidance for our 5 ports to implementation. Everyone will have the same strategy and also same target. The target that we would like to achieve to become net zero port in 2050. And all the 5 ports, we have to do the same to achieve this target. This target also become our corporate plans. Therefore, not only the one port have to commit, it means that Port Authority of Thailand commit this KPI as well. As a guidance of officer and project owner to develop the low carbon and environmental projects, it means that we have less systematic ways to improve our implementation. The environmental management is not only standalone implementation, it's part of our normal planning and decision-making process. Next slide, please. We use carbon footprint organization as a tool to tracking our performance. Last year, we achieved 5% reduction, which is achieve our designated target. And we invest more than 10 million US dollar in the low carbon technology and also the equipment in our port. We believe that with clear intention and also this can help to build trust and confidence amongst community, regulatory, and also port users. Next slide, please. In order to make sure that methodology of our calculation is meet the standard, we got the certificate from the Thailand Greenhouse Gas Organization to build trust and confidence among our stakeholders in our calculation and results. Next slide, please. We believe that with the clear target and measurable results and also the systematic plan, we can build trust among our stakeholders and achieve sustainable development goal as we would like to. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, Jackie.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Supatra, for that excellent presentation. It was really great to get some insights into what Port Authority of Thailand are doing and some of the investment and engagement going on there with your stakeholders, and the projects that you have in play is really commendable. We do have some time for Q&A, and we have got a couple of questions within the Q&A chat function. So if you haven't asked a question yet and you're wanting to, please do use that. But I'd like to invite all of our speakers to turn their cameras back on, and we can get started with the questions and answers session. Excellent. Okay, so I might start off with the one of the questions that we've got from Wesley. So thank you, Wesley, for your questions. You are our champion on the Q&A at the moment. But I'll start off with the question, and this is for anyone to answer. So please put your hand on the buzzer, and if you'd like to answer this one, jump in first. But what are some of the global green norms that have been adopted for maintaining social license to operate? And is it mandatory to adhere to these norms? And do we have any sort of independent authority to monitor the implementation of the process? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in there and answer or start to answer part of that one. Any norms for social license to operate? Maybe that's a good starting place. I don't think it's necessarily mandatory at a global level. But anyone want to talk to norms? I guess from my perspective, it's it's unique to each port's operation and each port's own regulatory environment. So it might be that you have a planning approval in place that requires you to engage and consult, and so that might be mandated from a consultation stakeholder engagement perspective. And I guess that's one part of social license. But I think another part of social license is kind of how you exist as a port within your communities, and that will be very unique in every case. And so Sarah mentioned earlier about having a community forum in place as a means of engaging with Midwest Port Authority's local communities. And maybe we'll go to that for a moment, Sarah, and just how do you see that as being a benefit from a social license to operate perspective? And is that kind of a norm to have a committee like that dedicated to engaging with communities at a port?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, I mean, within Western Australian Port Authority legislation, we are required to have a community consultation forum such as the one we have. So it is a regulatory requirement for us. But that said, we do see a lot of benefit with that forum. Certainly it allows for face-to-face engagement on a regular basis with people that are representing, bigger cross sections within the community. So it does cut through other, I guess, forms of communication, which we tend to, I feel, resort to in the digital age with social media, etc., and allows for that real face-to-face trust building and communication. So you can respond more quickly to issues that might be arising in the community or growing, and also take positive feedback as well when things are going well. So yeah, I find that it allows us to really keep our finger on the pulse, I suppose, with what are the big issues within the community and respond to them quite quickly as well. So we've certainly found it a huge benefit.
Yeah, excellent. No, thanks so much for sharing that insight, Sarah. And yeah, I recognise that in some cases these things will be mandated and some cases they won't. So I don't know that there's necessarily one single independent authority that oversees it all, but rather it's more kind of on a case-by-case basis, depending on the country and the region that you're located within. So hopefully that answers your question there, Wesley. Adrian, you mentioned earlier, and this is kind of sticking with that kind of community perception piece, and ports are often seen as, obviously they're kind of a conduit between many different parts of a port operation and not necessarily responsible for all of them, but can kind of sometimes be perceived as the party that is responsible for all of it. What do you think is an effective way for ports to kind of manage and respond to that perception?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. And Sarah, I saw that in your presentation you mentioned that the interaction with the port users as well as the community and the regular feedback that you get from them, and that would elicit direction for you to adjust or increase and broaden your ESG initiatives, because that's directed towards the reality of the situation, right? In answering your question, Jackie, I think that a port in isolation would need to do two things, and one is rank themselves. So prior to the or in tandem with the stakeholder engagement and workshops and surveys, is to rank themselves on those specific aspects. Environmental, social, labour relations, and the list goes on. But to rank themselves in the subsectors of those, and then to in separate to seek the advice from the from the stakeholders and the port users and the community. And if they match and align, that's great. Something which was a technical assistance project that was carried out in Southeast Asia pre-COVID allowed for those two surveys, and the mapping of those prioritised actions at the port and port terminals ranked. None of them aligned with the feedback from the port users and the communities. So I think that's a really good place to start, and the mapping of those two things, because one or the other in isolation doesn't give you a true sort of picture. So I hope I've addressed the question.
Thanks, Adrian. That's really helpful, and appreciate you responding to that question. So Petra, I've got a question for you. You've talked about some of the stakeholder engagement work that you've done at Port Authority of Thailand. What do you see as the main challenges in working with stakeholders to advance green port initiatives?
Thank you for the question. It's a very challenge for us to working with the stakeholder. Different stakeholder have a different perspective and needs. So, for example, community, they would like to have a good air, good water, and would like to minimize port environmental impact impact from port that would affect them. However, regulator would want us to comply with their regulation. However, for our internal port, for our port, we would like to lower cost and high efficiency. For we not really to compromise all the needs. We just engage them in our master plan and ask them to share their opinion amongst the group of them. And we will share our limitation. What can we do? And maybe we cannot do what they need at right now, but we commit that we will do it in the future. So in summary, we not try to compromise their needs, but rather exchange our experience, exchange our limitation, and just give them the opportunity to be part of our plans. This is what we do in our port right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So having that kind of two-way dialogue, being able to kind of get insight from them and understand what their expectations are, but also for you to be able to communicate as a port, you know, what you can and what you can't do in terms of you know, the port's ability to respond to all of those. I think that's a really important kind of part of this conversation is you know, it's about a balanced outcome, and that's why we talk about, you know, what's important, but also, you know, what is a risk and what we can control and influence. There's kind of other lenses that we need to look through when we're thinking about what is material. We've got another question here from an anonymous attendee, Adrian. How does ADB address social license risk when evaluating port infrastructure projects in emerging markets?
Yes, so anonymous, thank you for the question. So there is a responsible division and responsible experts within ADB, and they will engage on that with the mandated requirements for various developments and investments, you know, prior to these are gateway activities, which are, you know, safeguard compliance and not just regulatory, but ADB's own gateway thresholds that need to be measured and assured prior to the prior to approvals for project development and financing to proceed. And these are publicly available. And you can also map these to some case studies of certain projects, particularly in the maritime realm, that have proceeded in all sorts of scale. So small ports, small domestic ports, and large international ports as well. Yeah. So and ADB is seen as a bit of a leader in this as well. Over.
Thanks so much for that, Adrian. Much appreciated. We've got quite a few questions, and we've literally got one minute left in our webinar session today. So if we don't get to your question today, I do apologise. But I thought it might be nice to finish on a really nice note. And I know that we had a question around nature-based solutions, and I know that Sarah's got some really nice and environmental related projects that not only incorporate environmental aspects but also build in some social aspects. So maybe I thought we could finish on that note, and Sarah, if you just want to take us through that particular initiative that we were discussing earlier with the Sea Lions.
Yeah, sure, Jackie. Yeah, this is one we're really really proud of and excited about. So within the Geraldton Port, we have regular visitors from the Australian sea lions, and they're an endangered species that are a much-loved community icon. They do rest along the rock walls within the port infrastructure, so they're really part of the port, but also the community as well. So we've built up a program for additional protections for sea lions, which includes awareness programs within the port, but also extending them to the community as well through our social media channels and other communication measures. So I think in that way we're actually building awareness of sea lion protection within the wider community as well, and working with the traditional owners on building more monitoring data and supplying that to regulatory agencies. So I think that's a good example of how we've taken a really key community issue and incorporated it into our port programs. So in terms of nature-based sustainability, I think that's one that that probably speaks to that. So there's more information on that if anyone wishes to reach out to me separately on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share.
That's excellent. No, thanks, Sarah. And I think, we've got some great questions there, and material sustainability issues really do come down to your unique operations and the environment in which you are operating in. So really understanding what that is to you is a place to start, and then starting using those tools to be able to kind of focus in and prioritize those sustainability issues. So really, Nathaniel, just kind of semi-responding to your question there, what's more critical, reputational and operational kind of factors? It's really around what is unique to your ports organization that you need to kind of go through that process. But I really want to say thank you so much to all of our speakers today, and we've gone slightly over time, so apologies for that. But also thank you to ADB and the ACGF and also SEADS for hosting this evening's webinar. So thank you ever so much, everyone. I wish you all a great afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you for our next webinar number 4, which will be focusing on the cruise industry and sustainability matters associated with that. So we'll see you next time. Thank you.